Since the dawn of humankind, people have told each other ghost stories. You can even find early cave drawings of ghosts, goblins, and all manner of things that go bump in the night. But what is a ghost story? How did they take off? In this episode of the Doc TV Monster and Horror Documentary series, we'll be giving up our ghost to bring you all there is to know about ghost stories. What is a ghost story? A ghost story is any piece of fiction or drama that includes a ghost or takes as a premise the possibility of ghosts or characters' belief in them. The ghost may appear of its own accord or be summoned by magic. Linked to the ghost is the idea of a haunting, where a supernatural entity is tied to a place, object, or person. Ghost stories are common examples of ghost lore. Colloquially, the term ghost story can refer to a scary story. The ghost story has been developed as a short story format within genre fiction in a narrower sense. It is a form of supernatural fiction, specifically weird fiction, and is often a horror story. While ghost stories are often explicitly meant to scare, they have been written to serve purposes, from comedy to morality tales. Ghosts often appear as sentinels or prophets of things to come in the narrative. Belief in spirits is found in all cultures around the world, and thus ghost stories may be passed down orally or in written form. The history of ghost stories. A widespread belief concerning ghosts is that they are composed of a misty, airy, or subtle material. Anthropologists link this idea to early views that ghosts were the person within the person, the person's spirit, most noticeable in ancient cultures as a person's breath, which appears visibly as a white mist upon exhaling in colder climates. Belief in ghosts is found in all cultures around the world, and thus ghost stories may be passed down orally or in written form. The campfire story, a form of oral storytelling, often involves recounting ghost stories or other scary stories. Some stories are decades old, with varying versions across multiple cultures. Many schools and educational institutions encourage ghost storytelling as part of literature. In 1929, 5 key features of the English ghost story were identified in Some Remarks on Ghost Stories by M.R. James, as summarized by Frank Kaufman for a course in popular imaginative literature. They were: the pretense of truth, a pleasing terror, no gratuitous bloodshed or sex, no explanation of the machinery. Setting: those of the writer's and reader's own day. The introduction of pulp magazines in the early 1900s created new avenues for publishing ghost stories. They also began to appear in Good Housekeeping and the New Yorker publications. Ghosts in the classical world often appeared in the form of vapor or smoke, but at other times they were described as being substantial, appearing as they had been at the time of death, complete with the wounds that killed them. Spirits of the dead appear in literature as early as Homer's Odyssey, which features a journey to the underworld and the hero encountering the ghosts of the dead. In the Old Testament, the Witch of Endor calls the spirit of the prophet Samuel. The play Mostellaria, by the Roman playwright Plautus, is the earliest known work to feature a haunted dwelling and is sometimes translated as the haunted house. Another early account of a haunted place comes from a report by Pliny the Younger c. 50 AD. Pliny describes the haunting of a house in Athens by a ghost bound in chains, an archetype that would become familiar in later literature. Ghosts often appeared in the tragedies of the Roman writer Seneca, who would later influence the revival of tragedy on the Renaissance stage, particularly Thomas Kyd and Shakespeare. The 1001 Nights, sometimes known as Arabian Nights, contains many ghost stories, often involving jinn, also spelled as jinn, ghouls, and corpses. In particular, the tale of Ali the Ken and the haunted house in Baghdad revolves around a house haunted by jinns. Other medieval Arabic literature, such as the Encyclopedia of the Brethren of Purity, also contains ghost stories. The 11th century Japanese work, The Tale of Genji, contains ghost stories and includes characters being possessed by spirits. In the mid-16th century, The works of Seneca were rediscovered by Italian humanists, and they became the models for the revival of tragedy. Seneca's influence is particularly evident in Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy and Shakespeare's Hamlet, both of which share a revenge theme, a corpse-strewn climax, and ghosts among the cast. The ghosts in Richard III also resemble the Senecan model, while the ghost in Hamlet plays a more complex role. The shade of Hamlet's murdered father in Hamlet has become one of the more recognizable ghosts in English literature. In another of Shakespeare's works, Macbeth, the murdered Banquo returns as a ghost, to the dismay of the title character. In English Renaissance theatre, ghosts were often depicted in the garb of the living and even in armor. Armor, being out of date by the time of the Renaissance, gave the stage ghost a sense of antiquity. The sheeted ghost began to gain ground on stage in the 1800s because an armored spirit had to be moved about by complicated pulley systems or lifts, and eventually became cliched stage elements and objects of ridicule. And Jones and Peter Stalabras, in Renaissance clothing and the materials of memory, point out, in fact, it is as laughter increasingly threatens the ghost that he starts to be staged not in armor, but in some form of spirit drapery. An interesting observation by Jones and Stalabras is that at the historical point at which ghosts themselves become increasingly implausible, at least to an educated elite, to believe in them at all it seems to be necessary to assert their immateriality, their invisibility. The drapery of ghosts must now, indeed, be as spiritual as the ghosts themselves. This is a striking departure both from the ghosts of the Renaissance stage and from the Greek and Roman theatrical ghosts upon which that stage drew. The most prominent feature of Renaissance ghosts is precisely their gross materiality. They appear to us conspicuously clothed. Ghosts figured prominently in traditional British ballads of the 16th and 17th centuries, particularly the border ballads of the turbulent border country between England and Scotland. Ballads of this type include The Unquiet Grave, The Wife of Usher's Well, and Sweet William's Ghost, which feature the recurring theme of returning dead lovers or children. In King Henry's ballad, a starving ghost devours the king's horse and hounds before forcing the king into bed. The king then awakens to find the spirit transformed into a beautiful woman. One of the key early appearances of ghosts was The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole in 1764, considered the first Gothic novel. However, although the ghost story shares the use of the supernatural with the Gothic novel, the two forms differ. Ghost stories, unlike Gothic fiction, usually take place in a time and location near to the audience of the story. The modern short story emerged in Germany in the early decades of the 19th century. Kleist's The Beggar Woman of Locarno, published in 1810, and several other works from the period were the first ghost short stories of a modern type. E.T.A. Hoffmann's ghost stories include The Elementary Spirit and The Mines of Phalon. The Russian equivalent of the ghost story is the Bailichka. Notable examples of the genre from the 1830s include Gogol's V and Pushkin's The Queen of Spades, although scores of other stories from lesser-known writers were produced primarily as Christmas fiction. The Vosges mountain range is the setting for most ghost stories by the French writing team of Erckmann Chatrian. One of the earliest writers of ghost stories in English was Sir Walter Scott. His ghost stories, Wandering Willie's Tale 1824, first published as part of Red Gauntlet, and The Tapestried Chamber 1828, eschewed the Gothic style of writing and helped set an example for later writers in the genre. Historian of the ghost story Jack Sullivan has noted that many literary critics argue a golden age of the ghost story existed between the decline of the Gothic novel in the 1830s and the start of the First World War. Sullivan argues that the work of Edgar Allan Poe and Sheridan Le Fanu inaugurated this golden age. Irish author Sheridan Le Fanu was one of the most influential writers of ghost stories. The Fanu's collections, such as In a Glass Darkly 1872 and The Purcell Papers 1880, helped popularize the short story as a medium for ghost fiction. Charlotte Riddell, who wrote the novel as Mrs. J.H. Riddell, created ghost stories noted for adept use of the haunted house theme. The classic ghost story arose during the Victorian era and included authors such as M.R. James, Sheridan Le Fanu, Violet Hunt, and Henry James. The Gothic fiction tradition influenced classic ghost stories and contained elements of folklore and psychology. M.R. James summed up the essential elements of a ghost story as malevolence and terror, the glare of evil faces, the stony grin of unearthly malice, pursuing forms in darkness, and long-drawn, distant screams are all in place, and so is a modicum of blood, shared with deliberation and carefully husbanded. Famous literary apparitions from the Victorian period are the ghosts of A Christmas Carol. Ebenezer Scrooge is helped to see the error of his ways by the spirit of his former colleague Jacob Marley, and the ghosts of Christmas past, Christmas present, and Christmas yet to come. In a precursor to A Christmas Carol, Dickens published The Story of the Goblins Who Stole a Sexton. Dickens also wrote The Signalman, another work featuring a ghost. David Langford has described British author M.R. James wrote, the 20th century's most influential canon of ghost stories. James perfected a method of storytelling that has since become known as Jamesian, which involved abandoning many of the traditional Gothic elements of his predecessors. The classic Jamesian tale usually includes the following features: a characterful setting in an English village, seaside town or country estate, an ancient town in France, Denmark or Sweden, or a venerable abbey or university. A nondescript and rather naive gentleman scholar as protagonist, often of a reserved nature. The discovery of an old book or another antiquarian object that somehow unlocks, calls down the wrath, or at least attracts the unwelcome attention of a supernatural menace, usually from beyond the grave. According to James, two ingredients most valuable in the concocting of a ghost story are, to me, the atmosphere and the nicely managed crescendo. Let us, then, be introduced to the actors in a placid way. Let us see them going about their ordinary business, undisturbed by forebodings, pleased with their surroundings, and into this calm environment let the ominous thing put out its head, unobtrusively at first, and then more insistently until it holds the stage. Another aspect James considered a requisite was that the ghost should be malevolent or odious. Amiable and helpful apparitions are all very well in fairy tales or in local legends, but I have no use for them in a fictitious ghost story. Despite his suggestion in the essay Stories I Have Tried to Write that writers employ reticence in their work, many of James's tales depict scenes and images of savage and often disturbing violence. 19th century ghost stories. Influenced by British and German examples, American writers began to produce their own ghost stories. Washington Irving's short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow 1820, based on an earlier German folktale, features a headless horseman. It has been adapted for film and television many times, such as Sleepy Hollow, a successful 1999 feature film. Irving also wrote The Adventure of the German Student, and Edgar Allan Poe wrote some stories which contain ghosts, such as The Mask of the Red Death and Mauler. In the late 19th century, mainstream American writers such as Edith Wharton, Mary E. Wilkins Freeman, and F. Marion Crawford wrote ghost fiction. Henry James also wrote ghost stories, including The Jolly Corner and The Turn of the Screw. His most famous ghost story, The Turn of the Screw, has appeared in several adaptations, notably a film, The Innocents, and an opera, Benjamin Britten's The Turn of the Screw. The introduction of pulp magazines in the early 1900s created new avenues for publishing ghost stories. They also began to appear in Good Housekeeping and the New Yorker publications. In the United States, before and during the First World War, folklorists Olive Dame Campbell and Cecil Sharp collected ballads from the people of the Appalachian Mountains, which included ghostly themes such as The Cruel Ship's Carpenter, The Suffolk Miracle, The Unquiet Grave, and The Wife of Usher's Well. The theme of these ballads was often the return of a dead lover. These songs were variants of traditional British ballads handed down by generations of mountaineers descended from the people of the Anglo-Scottish border region. In the Edwardian era, Algernon Blackwood combined the ghost story with nature mysticism. Oliver Onions, whose ghost stories drew on psychological horror, and William Hope Hodgson, whose ghost tales also contained elements of the sea story and science fiction, helped move the ghost story in new directions. Kaiden, which means supernatural tale or weird tale, is a form of a Japanese ghost story. Kaiden entered the vernacular when a game called Haikumonogatari Kaidenkai became popular in the Edo period. The popularity of the game and the acquisition of a printing press led to the creation of a literary genre called Kaidanshu. Kaiden is not always a horror story. They can be funny or strange, or just tell about an odd thing that happened once. Lafcadio Heian published Kaiden, Stories and Studies of Strange Things in 1904 as a collection of Japanese ghost stories, which was also adapted into a film. The book is seen as the first introduction of Japanese superstition to European and American audiences. Modern era 1920 onward Ghost Stories magazine, which contained almost nothing but ghost stories, was published from 1926 to 1932. In the 1940s, Fritz Leiber wrote ghost tales set in modern industrial settings, such as Smoke Ghost in 1941 and A Bit of the Dark World in 1962. Shirley Jackson made an essential contribution to ghost fiction with her novel The Haunting of Hill House in 1959. A noted modern British writer of ghost fiction is Ramsey Campbell. Susan Hill also produced The Woman in Black 1983, a ghost novel that has been adapted for stage, television, and film. Noel Coward's play Blithe Spirit, later made into a 1945 film, places a more humorous slant on the phenomenon of the haunting of individuals and specific locations. During the late 1890s, the depiction of ghosts and supernatural events appeared in films. With the advent of motion pictures and television, screen depictions of ghosts became common and spanned various genres. The works of Shakespeare, Dickens, and Wilder have all been made into cinematic versions and adaptations of other playwrights and novelists. One of the well-known short films was Haunted Castle, directed by Georges Méliès in 1896. It is also considered the first silent short film depicting ghosts and supernatural events. In 1926, the novel Topper by Thorne Smith was published, which created the modern American ghost. When the novel was adapted into the 1937 movie Topper, it initiated a new film genre and would also influence television. After the Second World War, sentimental depictions of ghosts became more popular in cinema than horror, including the 1947 film The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, which was later adapted to television with a successful 1968 to 70 TV series. Genuine psychological horror films from this period include 1944's The Uninvited and 1945's Dead of Night. The film Blithe Spirit, based on a play by Noel Coward, was also produced in this period. 1963 saw one of the first significant adaptations of a ghost novel, The Haunting, based on the well-known book The Haunting of Hill House. The 1970s saw when screen depictions of ghosts diverge into distinct genres of romance and horror. A common theme in the romantic genre from this period is the ghost as a benign guide or messenger, often with unfinished business, such as in 1989's Field of Dreams, the 1990 film Ghost, and the 1993 comedy Heart and Souls. In the horror genre, the 1980s The Fog and the A Nightmare on Elm Street series of films from the 1980s and 1990s are notable examples of the trend for merging ghost stories with scenes of physical violence. The 1990s saw a return to classic Gothic ghosts, whose dangers were more psychological than physical. Examples of films that are comedy and mystery from this period include 1984's Ghostbusters, 1999's The Sixth Sense, and the others. The 1990s also saw a light-hearted adaptation of the children's character Casper the Friendly Ghost, originally popular in cartoon form in the 1950s and early 1960s, in Casper's feature film. Asian cinema has also produced horror films about ghosts, such as the 1998 Japanese film Ring, remade in the US as The Ring in 2002, and the Pang brothers' 2002 film The Eye. Indian ghost movies are popular not just in India, but in the Middle East, Africa, Southeast Asia, and other parts of the world. Some Indian ghost movies, such as the comedy horror film Manishitrathashu, have been commercial successes, dubbed into several languages. Generally, the films are based on the experiences of modern people who are unexpectedly exposed to ghosts and usually draw on traditional Indian literature or folklore. In some cases, the Indian films are remakes of Western films, such as Anjan, based on Alejandro Amenabar's ghost story The Others. In fictional television programming, ghosts have been explored in series such as Ghost Whisperer, Medium, Supernatural, the television series adaptation of The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, and Randall and Hopkirk Deceased. In animated fictional television programming, ghosts have served as the central element in series such as Casper the Friendly Ghost, Danny Phantom, Scooby-Doo, and minor roles in various other television shows. Popularized in part by the 1984 comedy franchise Ghostbusters, ghost hunting has been popularized as a hobby wherein reportedly haunted places are explored. The ghost hunting theme has been featured in paranormal reality television series such as A Haunting, Ghost Adventures, Ghost Hunters International, Ghost Lab, and Most Haunted. It is also represented in children's television by such programs as The Ghost Hunter, based on the book series of the same name, and Ghost Trackers. The Indian television series, Ohat, featured ghost and supernatural stories written by B.P. Singh. It was first aired on October 5, 1995, and ran for more than a decade, ending on November 25, 2010, with more than 450 episodes. Now that we've gone through the various histories of ghost stories worldwide, let's look at some of the more famous or infamous tales that haunt us today. The Amityville Horror. On November 13, 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot and killed 6 family members at 112 Ocean Avenue, a large Dutch colonial house situated in a suburban neighborhood in Amityville, on the south shore of Long Island, New York. He was convicted of second-degree murder in November 1975 and sentenced to 6 sentences of 25 years to life in prison. DeFeo died in custody in March 2021. In December 1975, George and Kathy Lutz and their 3 children moved into the house. After 28 days, the Lutzes fled the home, claiming to have been terrorized by paranormal phenomena. Jay Anson's book, The Amityville Horror, describes the house at 112 Ocean Avenue as remaining empty for 13 months after the DeFeo murders. In December 1975, George and Kathleen Lutz bought the house for what was considered a bargain price of $80,000. The 5-bedroom home was built in Dutch colonial style and had a distinctive gambrel roof. It also had a swimming pool and a boathouse as it was located on a canal. George and Kathy married in July 1975 and each had their own home, but they wanted to start fresh with a new property. Kathy had 3 children from a previous marriage: Daniel, 9, Christopher, 7, and Melissa Nissy, 5. They also owned a crossbreed Malamute Labrador dog named Harry. During their first inspection of the house, the real estate broker told them about the DeFeo murders and asked if this would affect their decision. After discussing the matter, they decided that it was not a problem. The Lutz family moved on December 18, 1975. Much of the DeFeo family's furniture was still in the house because the realtor included it for $400. A friend of George Lutz learned about the house's history and insisted on having it best. At the time, George was a non-practicing Methodist and had no experience of what this would entail. Kathy was a non-practicing Catholic and explained the process. George knew a Catholic priest named Father Ray, who agreed to carry out the house blessing. In Anson's book, real-life priest Father Ralph J. P. Corraro is referred to as Father Mancuso for privacy reasons. Father Mancuso was a lawyer, judge of the Catholic court, and psychotherapist who lived at the local Sacred Heart Rectory. He arrived to perform the blessing while George and Kathy were unpacking their belongings on December 18, 1975, and went into the building to carry out the rites. When he flicked the first holy water and began to pray, he heard a masculine voice demanding that he get out. Father Mancuso did not mention this incident to either George or Kathy when leaving the house. On December 24, 1975, Father Mancuso called George Lutz and advised him to stay out of the second-floor room where he had heard the mysterious voice, the former bedroom of Mark and John Matthew DeFeo, that Kathy planned to use as a sewing room. Still, the call was cut short by static. Following his visit to the house, Father Mancuso allegedly developed a high fever and blisters on his hands, similar to stigmata. At first, George and Kathy experienced nothing unusual in the house. Talking about their experiences subsequently, they reported that it was as if they were each living in a different house. By mid-January 1976, after another attempt at a house blessing by George and Kathy, they experienced what would turn out to be their final night in the house. The Lutzes declined to give a complete account of the events on this occasion, describing them as too frightening. After getting in touch with Father Mancuso, the Lutzes decided to take some belongings and stay at Kathy's mother's house in nearby Deer Park, New York, until they had sorted out the problems with the house. They claimed that the phenomena followed them there, with the final scene of Anson's book describing greenish-black slime coming up the staircase towards them. On January 14, 1976, George and Kathy Lutz, with their 3 children and their dog Harry, left 112 Ocean Avenue, leaving all their possessions behind. The next day, a mover arrived to remove the Lutz's possessions and ship them out to them. He reported no paranormal phenomena while inside the house. Jay Anson wrote the book after Tom Mossman, an editor at the publishing house Prentice Hall, introduced George and Kathy Lutz to Jay Anson. The Lutzes did not work directly with Anson but submitted around 45 hours of tape-recorded recollections to him, which were used as the basis of the book. Estimates of the book's sales are about 10 million copies from its numerous editions. Anson is said to have based the title of the Amityville horror on The Dunwich Horror by H.P. Lovecraft, which was published in 1929. The Vanishing Hitchhiker, or variations such as the Ghostly Hitchhiker, Disappearing Hitchhiker, or Phantom Hitchhiker, is an urban legend in which people traveling by vehicle meet with or are accompanied by a hitchhiker who subsequently vanishes without explanation, often from a moving car. Public knowledge of the story expanded greatly with the 1981 publication of Jan Harold Brunvan's non-fiction book, The Vanishing Hitchhiker. In his book, Brunvan suggests that the story of the vanishing hitchhiker can be traced as far back as the 1870s and has recognizable parallels in Korea, Tsarist Russia, among Chinese Americans, Mormons, and Ozark mountaineers. Similar stories have been reported for centuries across the world. A common variation of the above involves the vanishing hitchhiker departing as an ordinary passenger, having left some item in the vehicle, or borrowing a garment to protect against the cold. The vanishing hitchhiker may also give information that encourages the motorist to make subsequent contact. In such legend accounts, the garment borrowed is often found draped over a gravestone in a local cemetery. In this and other versions of the urban legend, the unsuspecting motorist makes contact with the family of a deceased person using the information the hitchhiker left behind and finds that the family's description of the dead matches the passenger the motorist picked up, and also finds that they were killed in some unexpected way, usually a car accident, and that the driver's encounter with the vanishing hitchhiker occurred on the anniversary of their death. Other variations reverse this scenario, in that the hitchhiker meets a driver. The hitchhiker later learns that the driver is an apparition of a person who died earlier. Not all vanishing hitchhiker legends involve ghosts. One popular variant in Hawaii consists of the goddess Pele, traveling the roads incognito and rewarding kind travelers. Other variants include hitchhikers who utter prophecies, typically pending catastrophes or other evil events, before vanishing. There is a similar story about two travelers sitting next to each other on a train, usually a man and a woman. One of them is reading a book, and the other person asks what the book is about, and the first person says that it's about ghosts. They then have a conversation about ghosts, and the second person asks the first if they believe in ghosts or have ever seen one, to which the first person says that they have never seen or believed in ghosts at all. The second person replies that this is doubtful and vanishes. This was the version used in the Scary Stories to tell in the Dark Book series. The Bell Witch Haunting. The Bell Witch or Bell Witch Haunting is a legend from the southern United States folklore, centered on the 19th century Bell family of northwest Robertson County, Tennessee. Farmer John Bell SR resided with his family along the Red River in an area currently near the town of Adams. According to legend, from 1817 to 1821, his family and the local area came under attack by a primarily invisible entity that was able to speak, affect the physical environment, and shapeshift. Some accounts also record the spirit to have been clairvoyant and capable of crossing long distances with superhuman speed and being in more than one place at a time. In 1894, newspaper editor Martin V. Ingram published his authenticated history of the Bell Witch. The book is widely regarded as the first full-length record of the legend and a primary source for subsequent treatments. The individuals recorded in the work were known historical personalities. Some skeptics have regarded Ingram's efforts as a work of historical fiction or fraud in modern times. Other researchers consider Ingram's work a nascent folklore study and an accurate reflection of belief in the region during the 19th century. While not a fundamental element of the initially recorded legend, the Bell Witch Cave in the 20th century became a source of continuing interest, belief, and generation of lore. Contemporary artistic interpretations, such as in film and music, have expanded the reach of the legend beyond the regional confines of the southern United States. In his book, An Authenticated History of the Bell Witch, author Martin V. Ingram published that the poltergeist's name was Kate, after the entity claimed at one point to be Old Kate Bat's Witch, and continued to respond favorably to the name. The physical activity centered on the Bell's youngest daughter, Betsy, and her father, and Kate expressed particular displeasure when Betsy became engaged to a local named Joshua Gardner. The haunting began sometime in 1817, when John Bell witnessed the apparition of a strange creature resembling a dog. Bell fired at the animal, but it disappeared. John's son Drew Bell approached an unknown bird perched on a fence that flew off and was of extraordinary size. The daughter Betsy observed a girl in a green dress swinging from the limb of an oak tree. Dean, a person enslaved by the Bell family, reported being followed by a large black dog on evenings he visited his wife. Activity moved to the Bell household with knocking heard along with the door and walls. The family heard sounds of gnawing on the beds, invisible dogs fighting, and chains along the floor. About this time, John Bell began experiencing paralysis in his mouth. The phenomena grew in intensity as sheets were pulled from beds when the children slept. Soon, the entity pulled hair and scratched the children, emphasizing Betsy, who was slapped, pinched, and stuck with pins. The Bells turned to family friend James Johnston for help. After retiring for the evening at the Bell home, Johnston was awakened that night by the same phenomena. He told John Bell it was a spirit, just like in the Bible. Soon word of the haunting spread, with some traveling great distances to see the witch. The apparition began to speak aloud and asked, "Who are you, and what do you want?" And the voice answered feebly, "I am a spirit. I was once very happy, but have been disturbed." The spirit offered diverse explanations of why it had appeared, tying its origin to the disturbance of a Native American burial mound located on the property, and sent Drew Bell and Bennett Porter on a fruitless search for buried treasure. With the emergence of entire conversations, the spirit repeated word for word 2 sermons given 13 miles apart simultaneously. The entity was well acquainted with biblical text and enjoyed religious arguments. As another amusement, the witch shared gossip about activities in other households and sometimes seemed to leave for brief moments to visit homes after an inquiry. John Johnston, a son of James, devised a test for the witch, something no one outside his family would know, asking the entity what his Dutch step-grandmother in North Carolina would say to the enslaved people if she thought they did something wrong. With his grandmother's accent, the witch replied, "Hut tut, what has happened now?" In another account, an Englishman stopped to visit and offered to investigate. On remarking on his family overseas, the witch suddenly began to mimic his English parents. Again in the early morning, the witch woke him to his parents' voices, worried as they had heard his voice. The Englishman quickly left that morning and later wrote to the Bell family that the entity had visited his family in England. He apologized for his skepticism. At times, the spirit displayed a form of kindness, especially towards Lucy, John Bell's wife, the most perfect woman to walk to earth. The witch would give Lucy fresh fruit, sing hymns to her, and show John Bell Jr. a measure of respect. Referring to John Bell Sr. as Old Jack, the witch claimed she intended to kill him and signaled this intention through curses, threats, and afflictions. The story climaxes with the Bell patriarch being poisoned by the witch. Afterward, the entity interrupted the mourners by singing drinking songs. In 1821, as a result of the witch's entreatment, Betsy Bell called off her engagement to Joshua Gardner. Subsequently, the entity told the family it would leave but return in 7 years in 1828. The witch returned on time to Lucy and her sons Richard and Joel with similar activities as before, but they chose not to encourage it, and the witch appeared to leave again. Several accounts say that Andrew Jackson was intrigued with the story during his military career, and his men were frightened away after traveling to investigate. In an independent oral tradition, recorded in the vicinity of Panola County, Mississippi, the witch was the ghost of an unpleasant overseer John Bell murdered in North Carolina. In this tradition, the spirit falls in love with the central character Mary, leading to her death. This account is reminiscent of vampire lore. The supernatural powers attributed to the Tennessee spirit have also been compared to jinns in mythology. In the manuscript attributed to Richard Williams Bell, he wrote that the spirit remained a mystery. Whether it was witchery, such as afflicted people in past centuries and the darker ages, whether some gifted fiend of hellish nature practicing sorcery for selfish enjoyment, or some more modern science akin to that of mesmerism, or some Hobgoblin native to the wilds of the country, or a disembodied soul shut out from heaven, or an evil spirit like those Paul drove out of the man into the swine, setting them mad, or a demon let loose from hell, I am unable to decide, nor has anyone yet divined its nature or cause for appearing, and I trust this description of the monster in all forms and shapes, and of many tongues, will lead experts who may come with a wiser generation to a correct conclusion and satisfactory explanation. Williams Bell, An Authenticated History of the Bell Witch. Chapter 8. Are your bones chilled? Do you have a tingling going up and down your spine? Good. That is the true power of the ghost story. Join us for another spooky entry into Doc TV Monster Horror documentary series next time. Until then, don't forget to look under your bed. Oh, and you may want to turn the lights on too.